The RAF can only spare 2 planes for D-Day, and the Navy's on course to have fewer than 10 frigates and destroyers for the first time in its history. So are our armed forces fit and ready to keep this country safe? This is World at War. I'm the Sun's defence editor, Jerome Starkey, and joining me today is Admiral the Lord West, former First Sea Lord and Security and Cyber Minister. Lord West, thank you for joining us. You led the Royal Navy. You were in charge of security in this country. Are the armed forces at the moment big enough, strong enough to keep this country safe?
I believe that the armed forces are not of a size they should be for a nation like us in what is a highly dangerous world, and with the commitments and requirements that are made of them. Now, the argument always is, we're part of an alliance, this doesn't matter. Yes, we're part of an alliance, but we are a key part of the alliances we're in. And I believe over a number of years now, there's been underfunding of defence, and it's come to a head in the last 2 or 3 years when we've seen the world degenerate into a really, really dangerous world that ministers have referred to as this is pre-war, for example. And at long last, I think people are understanding, goodness me, we've taken too much out of defence. There is a real hollowing out. If you remember the last Secretary of State for Defence, Wallace, actually made that statement. He was the Minister for Defence, and he said the armed forces are hollowed out, and they are hollowed out because of lack of funding. And the government now have said, right, we will increase spending up to 2.5% of GDP by 2030. One's always grateful. Thank God they've seen there's a problem, but that's too little, too late. I would have loved to have seen Labour say, we're going to go to 3% immediately, because I think we need more than that.
Lord West, you fought in the Falklands War. You led the Royal Navy. Do you agree with the characterisation of this as a pre-war world? Is the threat, as Rishi Sunak says, as great as it's been since the end of the Cold War?
Well, it's certainly, looking at my 50-odd years on the active list, I'm still on the active list because I was a First Sea Lord, it's probably the most dangerous since the Cold War. And the Cold War actually was safer in some ways because everyone understood it and one could talk backwards and forwards, and we knew this is very unpredictable now. We have a war in Europe, we have a war in the Levant, we have a fighting in the southern Red Sea, there's a war in Sudan, there are issues around Taiwan and in the South China Sea. This is really pretty worrying. We look at the alliance between Russia and China now, and Xi Jinping has said that he sees this as a turning point in history, like the first 40 years of the 20th century with the 2 world wars, when we established a world order that has done the world proud, actually. They would like to change that world order, and he's saying, I think this is a chance to do it. That is all very, very worrying. We need to focus on that. And if we don't spend sufficiently on defence, spending on defence often stops wars. It shows people you mean business, and it deters. And so I think spending on defence is very important, and we need to actually knuckle down to that now.
The Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has said we're in a golden age of shipbuilding, and he's also claimed, some dispute these figures, but he's claimed to have secured an extra £75 billion for the MOD between now and 2030. Do you recognise his description of that investment, that regeneration of the UK's armed forces?
Well, there is investment, but I'm afraid he's a bit economical with the actuality at times. As regards the amphibious ships, for example, they've been mentioned for some time. And I asked a number of questions about it. What's happening to the current landing platform docks? And they said, well, these new ones are coming along. They're in the programme. I said, well, where is the money in the programme for these? There was no money in there until it was announced by Grant Shapps last week. And he said, for 6. But it's not for 6. There's money for the first 3, and then maybe the next year. And we've done this consistently with our orders within shipbuilding. And that is why we're in the parlous state we are now. We should have made sure we ordered things earlier. And if you look, a whole stream of people, certainly me, in Parliament, have been saying now for a number of years, order now, get the orders in, or suddenly there will be a drop because ships will fall off the end of their lives and there'll be nothing there.
Now, a lot of people in their day-to-day lives, though, will probably have never seen a Royal Navy warship. What does it mean to them if we don't, if we have 6 destroyers or 5 destroyers? What difference does it make? I mean, what can't we do if we don't have enough ships?
Well, there are tasks, a number of tasks that are set, which are done in times of peacetime and tension. And basically what the government have done is, as the number of ships has reduced, they've said, well, we don't really need to do that task. Well, those tasks do need to be done. And those tasks actually are things that help make deterrence work. And so they've been a bit naughty in reducing. They will say, well, we fulfill all the commitments we've got. Well, if you say, well, actually, I'm not going to bother with a proper ship in the West Indies, I'm not going to bother with a proper ship as part of the standing NATO force in the then they can say, oh, we're not missing them. But actually, they're jobs that need to be done. And there's no doubt, with ships falling off the end of the line, and the new build that Grant Shapps was talking about, I mean, the first of the Type 31s, which is a cheap and cheerful, nice little ship, though, being built in Rosyth.
That's a frigate.
A frigate will be coming online in 2036. 2037. It's either 6 or 7. And the first of the Type 26 is a very smart, all singing, all dancing anti-submarine warfare ship, will be coming in a year later. That's fairly far down track. And what he's doing is saying, looking at ships way up in the programme, way down, which we're not going to have for years. The last of them we won't have until the 2040s or something. That is no good in a war if it happens in the next 3 or 4 years.
So if we have to fight, I mean, military people often talk about the fight, going the fight tonight, if we go to, what they can do tonight. But what tasks can we not do tonight? I mean, do we have enough frigates to protect UK waters from Russian submarines? And what tasks can't we do?
What we haven't got is the scale to ensure, for example, protection rapidly of trade, the important trade across the Atlantic. If we're talking about a real hot war here, trade across the Atlantic. We don't have sufficient ships to make sure they're with the carrier, to do the carrier strike operations that need to be done. I mean, I can list a whole raft, and it is important. As you say, you fight with what you got. 42 years ago today, my ship was sunk in the Falklands. Today, it's an important day for me, and we were fighting with what we'd got. The ships we had, the frigates, which formed a thin grey line, which helped protect the troops being landed, and there's no doubt they did a grand job, but they took casualties. They didn't have, most of them, the proper anti-air warfare capability. We had asked for that for years, and the government hadn't given it. They'd underfunded us. Luckily, we had the Harriers, which were crucial for that war, and they really paid off. But again, we'd really had to fight to get those.
You were instrumental in getting the aircraft carriers approved through government. We now have 2 aircraft carriers in the Royal Navy's fleet. They've had a lot of problems in terms of their reliability and serviceability. But you just mentioned that we wouldn't have the ships to defend them. I mean, does that render them useless, or in the event of conflict, would we just have to send them vulnerable into war?
Well, what you do is you'd use Allied frigates and you need a task group if you're in a really hot war. If you're fighting Russia in the North Atlantic, or particularly if you're going up towards into North Cape and things, that is a really hot war. You need a full capability to protect it. If you're doing it China in the South China Sea or just outside the first island chain, you do the same. If you're fighting against Houthi rebels, you can have a carrier on its own as long as it stays well clear of the coast, because none of the drones will ever reach it and they won't know where the hell it is, and you can do the damage. So there's a variance of what's needed. And if you are doing a really hot war, you can hide the carrier, but it needs the escorts to be part of the package that hides it. You have ships making noises for satellites and everything, so it looks exactly like a carrier. I spent my time doing this as a battle group commander. So it looks exactly like the carrier, and they have no idea which one is the carrier, where it is, exactly what's happening. It's moving all the time, and you've got defensive missiles, and therefore you can really, it's. Everyone talks about vulnerability. It's less vulnerable than almost any other military asset, apart from ballistic missile submarines and SSN.
The RAF only seems to be able to muster 2 of its A400M cargo planes for parachutists to jump out of for the D-Day commemorations. What's going on there? We hear from the government they've got Grant Shapps has claimed that the RAF has the greatest lift capability in many, many years. It doesn't appear that way to those of us looking from the outside.
I mean, this is a real own goal to sort of say we're going to do this before you check you've got the aircraft to do it. I mean, it's all part of a very complex issue relating to paying off of the C-130s, a very good, robust, aircraft we'd use so much.
Those are the
And
Hercules.
That's the Hercules. And the decision was made to pay these off. A lot of people said, don't go and do this suddenly and go for the A400M. This is, of course, the joint European aircraft. It's bigger. And there have been problems in that coming into service, real problems, cost problems and time problems, and also getting certification to throw men out of the back of it, that sort of thing. So it's tied up with all of that. But what a silly own goal. And it shows lack of defence funding, lack of thought about some of the programmes have caused this issue.
Lord West, thank you very much for joining me on World at War. I'm the Sun's defence editor, Jerome Starkey. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you have any questions, please don't forget to ask them in the comments below, and we'll do our best to answer some of them next week.